Beatrice's fall from grace began in the pale hush of morning, when her relatives forced her out with methodical coldness. They claimed the house, the possessions, and even her name, leaving her with only a small bundle and a silence sharp enough to wound. The door closed behind her with a finality that trembled through her bones. She walked away without looking back, for fear her resolve might shatter if she did. The road stretched before her, slick with dew, and she followed it because there was no other direction left to take. Though her heart ached at the scale of what she had lost, she kept moving, driven by a quiet instinct for survival that had lived inside her since childhood. By dusk, she reached Ashbourne Village, her dress clinging damply to her skin and her shoes worn thin. The lights of the manor on the hill glowed like a promise she did not dare believe in, yet desperation guided her toward its gates. At the servant's entrance, she requested work with a steadiness that surprised even her. Mrs. Rathwell, the housekeeper, examined her closely, noting her refined speech and careful posture. After a long moment of contemplation, she granted Beatrice a position in the kitchens, not out of confidence, but out of need, for winter was approaching. The work was constant. Beatrice scrubbed pots until her knuckles reddened and fetched water from the pump until her arms throbbed. Mrs. Hargreaves, the senior cook, issued instructions with clipped efficiency that left no room for errors. To falter was to invite scolding, and Beatrice soon learned to hide her exhaustion beneath quiet obedience. Yet she carried herself with an unspoken grace that unsettled some of the servants, who whispered that she was not what she seemed. She ignored them, for gossip was a small burden compared to her uncertainty. Her first encounter with Edmund, the Duke of Ashbourne, came on a windswept afternoon. Beatrice was crossing the courtyard with a tray of polished silver when the Duke's carriage arrived, its wheels spitting mud. The horses halted with disciplined precision, and Edmund stepped down, his presence commanding yet marked by a hint of weariness. His dark hair, dampened by mist, brushed the collar of his coat. As he strode across the courtyard, his gaze passed over Beatrice briefly, but in that glance she sensed a sharp awareness, as though he noticed details others overlooked. The moment dissolved quickly into the bustle surrounding him, yet it lingered with her long after she returned to her tasks. In the days that followed, Beatrice saw him rarely, though the manor thrummed with his influence. Papers arrived from London bearing seals she did not recognize, and conversations among the senior staff grew cautious. Edmund often walked the halls late at night, carrying letters or maps, his footsteps echoing against stone floors. Though he moved with the confidence expected of a duke, there was a quiet introspection in him unusual for a man of his rank. She never allowed herself to dwell on these observations, reminding herself that a servant's curiosity was dangerous. But her caution faltered one evening as she delivered linens to the guest corridor. Voices drifted through a partially open door, low, urgent, unmistakably noble. Two visiting knights spoke of a duchy lost to political upheaval, of a child hidden to protect a lineage, of guardianship agreements sealed by men seeking to prevent conflict. Beatrice froze, the linens slipping in her grasp. Their words echoed memories she had tried to bury. Her mother whispering foreign names, her father burning letters late at night, the sudden move to England that had ended all mention of their earlier life. A chill crept along her spine. If anyone suspected she understood the significance of such matters, she would be cast out instantly. Swallowing her panic, she retreated before she could be noticed. She returned to the kitchen with trembling hands, forcing herself to focus on the rhythm of work. Yet her thoughts churned, refusing to be soothed. Each remembered fragment from her childhood now carried new weight, as though the truth had been waiting for this moment to surface. Mrs. Hargreaves reprimanded her when she scorched a pan of broth, and Beatrice accepted the scolding without protest. Losing her composure would draw questions she could not answer, and fear tightened around her. She finished her duties quietly, keeping her gaze lowered whenever another servant commented on her distracted air. By the time her tasks were complete, her nerves were stretched thin, and she longed only for the solitude of her narrow cot. That night she lay awake, staring at the dark rafters above her. Rain pattered softly against the window, each drop marking the slow passage of time. She replayed the overheard conversation again and again, fitting the pieces against her earliest memories. Though she had always sensed there was more to her past than her relatives allowed, she had never imagined the scope of it. Now the possibility hung before her with unsettling clarity. The life she had been forced to forget might soon return to claim her. She turned on her side, pulling her thin blanket close. The manor seemed to breathe around her, its quiet grandeur both shelter and threat. She promised herself she would remain invisible, diligent, and cautious, for survival demanded nothing less. Yet even as she clung to that vow, she felt the first subtle shift of fate, a whisper of approaching change she could not name. In the faint glow of the dying hearth, she closed her eyes and hoped the truth would stay buried a little longer. But hope, she suspected, was no longer hers to command. Edmund returned to the manor with a composure that masked the pressures weighing on him, but Beatrice sensed a quiet shift in his demeanor long before anyone else remarked upon it. He moved through the halls with deliberate calm, offering small courtesies to the staff that startled those used to receiving a duke's direct attention. On one such evening, after a banquet that demanded hours of preparation, he descended into the kitchens to thank the servants personally. The gesture stunned the entire staff into silence. Beatrice, who stood nearest the stove with her sleeves rolled high, bowed her head instinctively. When he paused beside her, his gaze flickered to the rawness of her hands. He said nothing, yet the concern in his eyes unsettled her more than words might have. Later that night, she discovered a small tin of lavender salve placed beside her workstation. No note accompanied it, and no one claimed responsibility, but every servant who saw it understood the significance. Several exchanged glances, their whispers drifting through the kitchens like sparks searching for fuel. Beatrice resisted every impulse to use the salve at once. She feared that accepting such kindness from Edmund would invite unwanted attention or, worse, assumptions that might endanger her position. Still, her hands ached, and the scent of lavender offered a comfort she had not felt in months. She applied it cautiously after nightfall, convinced no one would notice. The relief was immediate, a soft balm against the harsh world she inhabited. She told herself it was only a practical remedy, nothing more. Days later, while sorting laundry, she discovered a small trinket tangled in the seam of her apron, a crest she had not seen since childhood. At first she believed it had been misplaced by someone else, but her breath caught when she recognized the delicate engraving, a falcon crowned with roses. She remembered her mother whispering the crest's significance, though the meaning had always been veiled in careful evasions. She had assumed these memories were scraps of fantasy, yet here the symbol lay, real and gleaming, in her palm. She tucked it away swiftly, her pulse quickening. The discovery would have remained private had the scholarly footman, Mr. Lennox, not approached her later that afternoon. He had noticed her hurried movements, her attempts to conceal something in her apron, and although his curiosity was gentle, it was persistent. When she tried to change the subject, he mentioned, almost casually, that he had seen the crest before, in an old book detailing dissolved duchies of the continent. His expression tightened when she stiffened. He did not press her further, but the exchange left her rattled. The staff's whispers began again, fueled by speculation that had grown sharper since Edmund's unexpected gesture toward her. The speculation reached its peak the evening of the Baroness's visit. The manor glittered with candlelight as guests arrived in carriages, their laughter echoing through the halls. Beatrice moved between tables, refilling glasses and clearing plates with practiced efficiency. During one pass, the Baroness's gaze snagged on her face, lingering with unsettling intensity. Beatrice lowered her eyes, but the scrutiny did not abate. Moments later the Baroness murmured to a companion, loud enough for several servants to hear, that Beatrice bore a remarkable likeness to a noblewoman she had once met abroad, a woman rumored to be connected to a now-defunct duchy. The murmurs passed swiftly from guest to guest, eventually trickling into the servants' hall. Mrs. Rathwell questioned her discreetly after the guests departed, though her tone suggested she hoped for reassurance rather than confession. Beatrice denied any knowledge of noble ties, insisting that her life before Ashbourne held nothing of interest. The housekeeper accepted the answer outwardly, but doubt lingered in her gaze. Beatrice sensed the fragile equilibrium she had built slipping from her grasp. Every gesture, every word she spoke, seemed to be watched for hidden meaning. Meanwhile, Edmund studied her with increasing intensity. It began with small exchanges, brief questions about her welfare, polite acknowledgments of her work, but soon his inquiries shifted toward matters she could not predict. He asked about her education, her fluency in languages, her manner of speech. His tone remained respectful, yet something in his voice suggested he sought to understand her in a way that exceeded the bounds of propriety. She answered carefully, grateful for his kindness, yet wary of its implications. The closer he drew, the more she feared the truth he might uncover. Her worries were not misplaced. One evening, Edmund uncovered a sealed packet of documents among his late father's correspondences. The papers referenced diplomatic agreements, guardianship responsibilities, and the protection of a child whose identity had been concealed for safety. Though no names were listed, the dates and circumstances aligned too neatly with what Beatrice remembered from her earliest years. Edmund studied the documents long into the night, his expression shifting from curiosity to concern. When he folded them away, he did so with the deliberation of a man who had just glimpsed a truth he could not ignore. His behavior the next morning confirmed her suspicions. He watched her from across the courtyard as she hung linens to dry, his gaze filled with questions he seemed reluctant to voice. She worked with trembling hands, determined not to betray her dread. But the moment their eyes met, she sensed that the delicate veil shielding her past had begun to fray. The tension surrounding her continued to grow. Servants exchanged glances whenever she entered a room. Some regarded her with newfound respect. Others eyed her with jealousy, convinced she sought to climb beyond her station. Beatrice wished only to disappear into her work, yet the scrutiny made anonymity impossible. Every gesture she made, every word she spoke, seemed to echo louder than it should. One night, as she carried kindling to the scullery, she overheard Edmund speaking with Mr. Lennox. Their tones were low, but urgency sharpened each word. Edmund mentioned his intention to travel to London, citing research into diplomatic archives. Lennox cautioned him about stirring old political matters, warning that such inquiries might revive tensions better left undisturbed. Edmund responded with a firmness that sent chills through Beatrice. If someone in his household had been wronged, he would not abandon the matter. She slipped away before she could hear more, her heart pounding. The Duke's determination frightened her almost as much as the truth he might unveil. She knew the world she had fled might soon rise again to claim her, altering everything she had tried to build. When she returned to her quarters, exhaustion weighed on her, yet sleep refused to come. The manor, once a place of refuge, now felt like a labyrinth of thinly veiled secrets. She pressed a hand over the hidden crest in her apron pocket, its edges cool against her skin. The truth encroached from all sides, and her attempts to escape it felt increasingly futile. Still, amidst her fear, a spark of something unfamiliar flickered, a sense that Edmund's interest was not born of suspicion alone. Whether it was compassion, duty, or something gentler, she could not yet discern. But whatever its nature, it threatened to change the course of her life, and she felt the shift with every beat of her unsteady heart. As candlelight dwindled in the corridors outside, she understood that the delicate balance she had tried to preserve could not endure much longer. And though she longed to step back into obscurity, fate was already turning its next page, drawing her into a story she could neither avoid nor fully comprehend. Edmund summoned Beatrice to the library on an evening when the last light faded behind the hills. She entered quietly, unsure why she had been called, her heart beating with equal parts fear and anticipation. The room smelled of old paper and candle wax, the window cracked just enough for the cool air to drift in. Edmund stood near the hearth, his posture straight yet marked by restraint. When he turned, the firelight softened the tension in his features, but the concern in his eyes sharpened her uncertainty. He began gently, asking whether she felt well and whether the staff treated her with fairness. His concern unsettled her, for kindness from someone of his rank often carried implications. She answered politely, though her voice wavered. Edmund studied her with searching patience and gestured toward a chair. She hesitated, unsure she had the right, until he insisted with quiet insistence that she sit. Even then she perched on the edge, as though prepared to flee. "Beatrice," he said softly, "forgive my bluntness, but I cannot ignore the feeling that you carry a history heavier than you admit." His tone held no accusation, only earnestness. She lowered her gaze, unable to respond. Edmund continued, speaking of the Baroness's remarks, the servant's speculation, and the sealed papers he had discovered among his father's archives. She stiffened at the mention of those documents, though she tried to hide it. "I do not seek to expose you," he added. "I wish only to know whether you are safe." Her composure broke. She confessed that her memories were fragmented. Hasty departures, whispered warnings, and her mother's fearful glances. She admitted she did not know the full truth, that her relatives had buried what little she might have learned. Edmund listened without interruption, his expression troubled but compassionate. When she finished, silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of her vulnerability. She rose, eager to deflect her own trembling, and offered to prepare a simple meal. He allowed it, sensing her need for distraction. She returned with warm bread, broth, and roasted vegetables, the fragrance filling the quiet room. Edmund ate with a gratitude that surprised her, savoring each bite as though the modest meal carried greater comfort than the lavish dinners served upstairs. When she reached to gather the tray, their hands brushed. The brief contact stirred a warmth in her chest that frightened her. She withdrew quickly, but Edmund did not. He set the tray aside and addressed her with quiet intensity. "You should not fear me," he said. "If your past is unclear, then let us face it together." His sincerity disarmed her. She shook her head, overwhelmed, yet the moment pressed on her heart with unbearable force. Without meaning to, she whispered the words that had lived unspoken within her. "I will cook for you every day. Make me your wife." The confession stunned her the instant it escaped. She turned away, mortified, certain she had overstepped beyond forgiveness. Silence filled the room, and she braced herself for rejection. When Edmund finally spoke, his voice held only gentleness. "You offer devotion born of fear and gratitude," he said. "I cannot accept a vow made under such strain." She flinched, but his tone carried no cruelty. He stepped closer, just enough that she felt his warmth. "However," he continued, "if the world denies you a place, I will build you one. Not out of obligation, out of conviction." His words settled into her like a fragile miracle. She dared to meet his gaze and found no judgment there, only determination. The fire crackled softly, and beyond the windows, snow drifted in steady, delicate spirals. Edmund withdrew slightly, giving her space. Then he told her he intended to travel to London within the week. He would examine the archives himself, seeking confirmation of her past. The journey carried risks, political entanglements, social scrutiny, and the possibility of uncovering truths that might unsettle both their lives. Beatrice protested, terrified of consequences she could not predict. She insisted the inquiry was unnecessary, that ignorance might be safer. Edmund silenced her gently. "If the truth threatens you," he said, "then it must be faced." She could not argue with such resolve. Fear and gratitude mingled inside her until she could no longer distinguish one from the other. The room seemed to hold its breath as the fire burned low, casting wavering light across the shelves. When Edmund escorted her to the door, his formality revealed the gravity of what had transpired. Before she stepped into the corridor, he added quietly, "Whatever waits in London, you are not alone in this." She walked back to her quarters in a daze, her heartbeat unsteady. The manor's halls felt changed, as if every shadow carried new meaning. She pressed a hand against her chest, struggling to steady herself. Edmund's vow echoed with unsettling clarity, binding her fate to his in ways she had never foreseen. By the time she reached her cot, she knew nothing in her life would remain untouched by what had been set in motion. She lay awake long after extinguishing her candle, her thoughts circling the revelations of the evening. Edmund's resolve unsettled her, yet it offered a strange form of solace. No one had ever insisted she deserved answers before. No one had dared to stand between her and danger. The idea that he would travel to London on her behalf felt both impossible and profoundly moving. She feared what he might find, feared even more the consequences of being truly known. Yet beneath her dread flickered a fragile flicker of hope she could not silence. She clutched her blanket, wishing for courage she did not yet possess. She breathed. Edmund returned from London with winter clinging to his coat and a stillness that unsettled the servants who hurried out of his path. Beatrice waited in the entrance hall, her hands clasped tightly before her. When he dismissed everyone but her breath faltered. He produced a sealed packet, its edges worn from travel, and told her he had found what she had feared and longed for in equal measure. The archives confirmed her parents' marriage, her mother's noble lineage, and her own birthright. She listened in stunned stillness as he described the dissolving of her family's duchy and the desperate measures taken to hide her existence. The truth settled over her like a mantle she had never expected to wear, both heavy and strangely liberating, a revelation that reshaped the very ground beneath her. Beatrice sat heavily on a bench, her thoughts scattered like leaves in wind. She had imagined many possibilities, but certainty had never been among them. Edmund knelt beside her, explaining how he had traced signatures, testimonies, and diplomatic seals that left no room for doubt. He assured her that discovering her origins only deepened his admiration, for she had endured hardship with grace, even without knowing who she truly was. She thanked him with trembling words, overwhelmed not only by the truth, but by the devotion he had shown in seeking it. His voice, gentled as he reminded her the past, did not define her worth. His presence, steady and warm, steadied her frayed thoughts. For the first time in years, she felt seen without fear, understood without explanation, and valued for more than the shadows that clung to her history. Gossip swept through the neighboring estates with merciless speed. Some nobles scoffed at the idea of a servant proven noble by forgotten documents. Others claimed Edmund had been misled or acted from misplaced sympathy. Several urged him to dismiss Beatrice to salvage his reputation. Rather than submit, Edmund addressed the matter directly. He summoned the entire household to the great hall and laid out the authenticated records, presenting each piece with calm authority. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as faces shifted from doubt to awe. By the time he finished speaking, no one dared question her identity. Beatrice stood near him, her breath unsteady, as he proclaimed before all that she would remain under his protection. In that moment, she felt a surge of belonging so fierce she could scarcely hold back tears, for the world had tried to strip her of everything, yet he had restored more than she had ever hoped to reclaim. In the quiet that followed that decisive moment, Edmund sought Beatrice in the gardens where frost clung to the hedges like pale lace. There he spoke softly, telling her he wished not only to defend her identity, but to stand beside her in all the years ahead. His proposal was simple, sincere, and utterly free of expectations tied to her restored heritage. Beatrice accepted with tears that warmed her cold cheeks. Their wedding took place in a small chapel filled with winter blooms. Villagers arrived in hushed admiration, drawn less by curiosity than by affection for the couple who had defied convention with dignity. When they exchanged vows, the air seemed to glow with quiet wonder, as though even the walls recognized the significance of the moment. Edmund's gaze never left her, and she felt the promise of a future built on equality and devotion. Marriage transformed Ashbourne in gentle but profound ways. Beatrice brought compassion to every corner of the manor, shaping it into a home rather than a monument to lineage. Edmund supported her quietly, taking comfort in her presence after years of bearing responsibility alone. Their bond deepened further during a visit to London, where they toured a foundling home burdened by neglect. Beatrice knelt among the children, her voice soft with sympathy, and Edmund saw the tenderness in her eyes as a reflection of the woman he had come to love. She lifted a weary infant into her arms with an instinctive grace. In that moment, Edmund understood her capacity to heal what the world had broken, and he felt his admiration grow even stronger. They left the foundling home with hearts too heavy to ignore its plight. Moved by the plight of the abandoned infants, they adopted 2 children, a solemn little boy who clung to Beatrice's hand and a baby girl whose laughter brightened the dim halls. Bringing them home reshaped the rhythm of the manor. Laughter echoed through the corridors, and evenings were filled with stories by the hearth. Beatrice sang lullabies from her mother's tongue, blending fragments of her reclaimed past into the comfort of her new family. Edmund often paused in doorways simply to watch them, grateful for the peace that had finally taken root. Their home, once marked by quiet formality, now pulsed with life and warmth. Every corner held evidence of the family they were becoming, not by blood but by choice. As seasons passed, a quiet steadiness settled over their life. Beatrice came to understand that titles did not define her, choices did. Edmund found peace he had never known, grateful each day for the moment she had first appeared in the courtyard with polished trays and dignified sorrow. Their love, once fragile with uncertainty, grew into something enduring and bright, a refuge against the world's unpredictable cruelties. Guests who visited the manor often remarked on the serenity that seemed woven into its very walls, though few understood the trials that had forged it. One summer evening, they walked along the meadow behind the manor while their children chased butterflies across the tall grass. Beatrice paused to watch them, her heart swelling with a wonder she had never dreamed possible. Edmund slipped his hand into hers, the gesture simple yet rich with devotion. In the warm glow of the setting sun, they stood together in a silence shaped not by doubt but by contentment. She realized then that the life she had built was not the restoration of a lost crown, but the creation of something entirely her own, rooted in love rather than lineage. The moment shimmered with a quiet perfection she knew she would remember always. Their story spread softly through the region, told not as legend, but as a reminder that dignity could survive even the harshest trials. Yet within Ashbourne, it remained a private tale, of a duke who defied convention, a woman who reclaimed herself, and a family shaped entirely by love. And as dusk settled over their home, it was clear that the happiness they had forged would endure, steady and luminous, through every season yet to come. Which city are you watching our video from? Please leave a comment. Please subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you.